Hey Asian Book Club listeners, it's Steven.
And Jamae.
And we just wanted to mention that in this episode, we do bring up the discussion of suicide. We know that this topic is sensitive, personal, and distressing.
So if you or someone you know is experiencing suicidal ideation, please reach out for help. You can contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or text HOME to the crisis text line at 741-741. Or if you identify as an LGBTQ plus youth, you can reach the Trevor Lifeline at 1-866-488-7386.
Please find help if you need it. We care for you.
Take care.
Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
And I'm Stephen Park. And today, we're gonna continue with Pachinko, but within one of the scenes in this book, there's a scene where they're eating, and by they, I mean Noah and Hansu, and there's a specific mention about how they're eating.
Yes.
So, Hansu is... he's kind of enveloped in Japanese culture at this point. Noah is somewhere in between. I think he's trying to figure out what his identity is.
Yes.
But then Noah mentions how he notices that the food that they're eating and how Hansu is eating is very slow. Not even slow, but just maybe more thoughtful.
Yeah, very casual and easygoing.
Whereas Noah noticed that with Korean people, that they were quote-unquote working Koreans, and they were eating very hurriedly and very quickly.
Right. Just trying to get it all down to get back to work.
Right. And we also heard in different things, which I didn't notice that this was a thing, or I didn't realize this was a commonality amongst Koreans, but apparently we like to eat food very hot.
Yes.
And that's something you mentioned.
Right. Because my mom had a coworker who's Korean, and when things are hot, she just stuffs them in her mouth and she eats everything so fast, and in order to get it down, she fans her mouth and punches her chest and just keeps shoveling the food in her mouth, and my mom is always afraid for her and saying slow down, and her answer or her friend's reply would be, I'm okay, it's fine, this is how I eat.
There's also like a technique of having the food in your mouth and then you leave your mouth open and you fan by breathing. You go,
Yes.
So it's a technique that's used. I've also had times where I ate food so quickly that it's burned the roof of my mouth, but it doesn't hurt anymore. I just get blisters, and I'm like, oh. Yeah, this is kind of gross, but I was like, oh, the skin's peeling off. That's new.
Oh.
But yeah, I didn't realize that it was such a commonality. Like, I thought that was just either me or my family. Like, I grew up with my older brother.
Right.
And so I think to get all the good pieces, we like hurried
had to
and
fight for it.
Yeah. So I thought it was just us. I mean, since dating you, I've noticed that you eat much more slowly.
Well, but that's just a me thing. That's not a Filipino thing.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, like, compared to, like, my pace of eating.
Which is just very hurried.
Right. And then that compared to how you eat is, like, very different.
Oh, yeah.
So I didn't realize this was a working class Korean thing. I did hear from my dad, my dad eats very slowly now. I don't know. I know one big thing is digestion and health.
Yeah.
But one thing that he did tell me was that there's mandated army service for Koreans. And so during that period, you have to kind of eat quickly because that's what you do in the army.
Yeah.
And so a lot of Korean men learn to eat very quickly to kind of make sure you are able to eat during those periods. It's like 2 years of service.
Right.
So I know that's a part of it. I never did service. I just love food and I want all of it. So I try to put it all in my mouth as quickly as possible.
Right. And that tends to lead you to getting full slower because you don't realize you're full until it's too late.
Right. And on top of being full slower, it's also eating way more than I should have and then suffering the consequences later.
Right.
Yeah. I thought it was unique. I didn't realize it was such a unique thing to Korean people. Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
Which is interesting. And a good way to find out about more of that is if you travel to Korea yourself and I guess go observe Korean people. This is my bad segue into our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is Internationally Me by Angela on YouTube. What I've been really enjoying these days is watching YouTube videos and specifically watching travel videos. And it can be international travel, it could be national, domestic travel, or it could just be travel in your local community. But one of those channels is Internationally Me. Angela is a Tokyo-based and New Zealand-raised travel blogger, and she focuses specifically on Japan with spots that are off the beaten path, especially the lesser-known areas that are not very touristy in nature. What I've also learned is that she's currently also offering travel consultations for personalized tips and recommendations for planning your trip to Japan, which I think would be really awesome because Steven and I have been considering going to Japan sometime in the future. We don't know when, but it's on our bucket list.
Not anymore. Just kidding.
What? Anyway, check her YouTube channel to learn more about how to contact her, and her YouTube channel is at Internationally Me, and you can also support her on Patreon at Internationally Me.
Yeah, and that's our recommendation for the week. Okay, so we're on our 4th out of our 5 reads of Pachinko. And what have we learned so far?
So, from the last read, we've learned that Hansu has come back from wherever it was he was hiding. We also know that Yosep goes to Nagasaki for work while the rest of the family stays on a farm and works there in safety. We find out that the war ends, and by the war ending, that means that Nagasaki and Hiroshima got bombed, which then led to Yosep getting hurt badly. We also know that Noah and Mozazu are growing up. Noah has always been wanting to go to Waseda. Mozazu doesn't want to go to school. They both grow up and are able to fulfill their dreams in that Noah goes to Waseda using Hansu's money, which Sanja accepts. And Mozazu is able to leave school and get a job and flourish as a manager under Goro in the pachinko parlor.
Right. And so our next read for this time has been in book 2 from chapters 17 through 20, and then book 3 chapters 1 through 8.
Yes.
Now, before we go into any of this content, one is much more of a trigger warning, the other one's just more of a content warning.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of sexy time, some interesting sexy times.
There's a very specific sexy time. There are many sexy times. There's one specific section where we're like, ooh, we're getting very, very, very specific.
Which, at a certain point, I was originally thinking, oh, I want my mom to read this with me. And now I'm like, I don't want to discuss this with my mom. This is too much. This is too much.
Well, you don't have to discuss that part.
I mean, it's a pretty big part. And there's other parts. There are many sexy parts.
True.
But then the much bigger trigger warning is that there is a mention of suicide in this. It's very quick in the book, but I think it's also very important.
I don't think it's quick. It is mentioned within a chapter, and it's speaking of at different times too.
Right.
So it's not quick, especially if that's a trigger.
True.
So skip chapter 8 of book 3 if that's something that's triggering, but there are some plot points you might miss if you do skip it.
And I think there are some other parts where the thoughts are also mentioned by like Haruki, but we'll get to those points.
Right, but the reason why we're mentioning this is so that you can take care of yourself if that's a trigger, or to warn others who you are going to share this book with.
Right. So let's start with some of the, I guess, easier relationships.
So many events have happened in this short period of time.
Right.
And there are so many jumps and skips in terms of dates and
people.
And people, yes, to the point where I'm like, what Who's 70? What?
Yep.
Anyway, but because of that, this time when we're talking about these particular chapters, rather than focusing on the events, we're going to focus on the relationships, because I think that became the star of this section.
Mm-hmm. So one of the relationships that came up is something that we kind of ended on the last time.
Yeah.
And that was Mozazu and Yumi.
Yes.
Now, for those that don't remember, Yumi is one of the seamstresses that worked under Toriyama.
Yes.
Who is Haruki's mom.
Yes.
And Mozazu had been going there because Goro had given him suits and other presents.
Right, because he wants him to look presentable in a way that suits his station.
Exactly. And so Mozazu charms Yumi.
With his English-speaking skills.
And so they have now gotten together and they have now formed a life.
Right, like, and it happens so quickly. The fact that at first Yumi was not wanting to get with him, but then all of a sudden showing his language skills and showing that he wants to learn with her. I related so much to that because that's how I am. I am more interested in a person who is learned and who wants to continue to grow than a person who is very handsome. But it turns out that Mozasu is both.
And so is Steven.
Yeah.
So in these next chapters, and it's kind of a story that slowly peels itself back.
Right.
But we start to learn who Yumi is.
Right. That she had a troubled past.
Right. And so for some people, this brings on a lot. So her past is very, very tough.
Right.
But she was raised by parents who really didn't care about her.
Yeah.
One was an alcoholic mother who gambled and lost money all the time.
Right. And she's also a sex worker.
Right. And she was extremely emotionally and physically abusive to her kids. And her father was a pimp. The pimp that actually, I guess, took care of the mom. I don't know what the word is.
Not even taking care. Like, pretty much the pimp who owned her, really.
Yeah.
Ugh, it's terrible.
Yeah, and so Yumi grew up in this environment where her mom really just didn't want the kids and was abusing them. And so the kids ran away. Yumi ended up being the person that spent those years taking care of her siblings.
Right.
We also find out that Yumi lost her youngest sister within that time when they were trying to transition.
Right.
And so, you know, this comes out in different parts. At one point, she even tells Sunja this, and Sunja's like, you've had a very tough life. And yeah, like, I think this develops Yumi to be the character that she is, and that seamstress who Totiyama kind of describes as someone who like worked constantly and was such a hard worker. Right,
because that's all she knew.
Right. And we also know that Yumi had dreams of going to America, which is why she so avidly wanted to learn English.
Right. Like, any time that she could bring it up to Mozazu, she was like, this is where we should go. Why do we have to stay here? And then also talking about, should we go to the East Coast or the West Coast? And it's like, so while reading that, I kind of felt like it reminded me of family members who feel the same, like, we can't stay in the Philippines, we need to go to Guam, and then when they're in Guam, we need to go to the United States because that is the ultimate goal. And I felt like that was so misguided, but also understanding that where she came from and the time, that it did seem like the ultimate golden ticket.
And I mean, honestly, like, we're talking 60s at this point, I think, 70s. In the book. 70s. U.S. was a pretty booming society in the 70s. Like, there was a lot going on. Japan they had lost World War II, and, you know, this is still their recovery, I think.
Right.
It's also that, like, Little Mermaid thing where it's like, oh, I want to be somewhere where things look better.
Right.
It's something that seemed very reasonable. I feel like Yumi's not the only person in Japan, nor in the world, that wanted to go to America at the time.
Fair. And it's also like they couldn't go back home anyway.
Right.
So it's either move forward or get stuck, and
Right.
it's more like, let's move forward then.
Right. And so they're slowly building this family together.
Yeah.
They attempt to have children, and Yumi loses 2 pregnancies.
Yes, because she was very adamant about working.
Right. But the 3rd pregnancy is a little bit different. Mozazu pretty much encourages and I would say even maybe forces her to not work.
Well, because they were able to find a doctor who told her to not work.
Right.
And then having the reassurance that Mozazu can continue to uphold the household. And then having Sonja there, too, to remind her not to do anything while she's the one doing all the work at home.
Right.
And I think that also having her presence there was enough to be like, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not alone with my thoughts. And I think that's another thing that she might have been afraid of. She didn't want to be by herself and be back into that situation where she was her and her sister and then her sister dying. I think that's something that she didn't want to face on her own.
Right. And so this pregnancy is successful.
Yeah.
It gives birth to Solomon on this 3rd pregnancy.
Yes.
And we even find out on Solomon's 1st birthday that he picks the yen note. So for some people, you may not know this, but in Korean tradition, and I think this is uniquely Korean.
Yes.
But we have something called Tol, which is usually a 100-day celebration. They talk about it as the 1st birthday, which the 100-day thing is significant because a lot of children used to pass away by 100-day.
Right.
So that's when they used to celebrate this event.
Right.
But what you do is for the kid, you set them kind of down on a mat, and on the mat you have like 4, 5, 6. It just kind of depends on what you want. But you have all these items that signify different things. So either a pencil to become a scholar, money to show that you'll get rich. I forget what the other ones are, but like different.
Like a paintbrush to be an artist.
Yeah, paintbrush to be an artist. So they have these things laid out so that it is kind of premonition to...
Right, like whatever the baby touches first
Right.
is going to be what their life's going to be like.
Right, and so on this day is when Solomon chooses a yen note, which signifies a rich life.
Yes.
Which maybe is insinuating something, but also everything I've thought of until this point with this book is just shuffled. Like, I don't know if it's going to come true or not. Like, this book has been wild.
It has blown us away.
Yes. So, who knows what happens.
Right.
But going back to the relationship with Mozazu and Yumi, which was so lovely, it was so beautiful.
Right.
I don't know why Min Jin Lee does this, but man, she like just kills people off like it's Game of Thrones. This is crazy.
Yes.
So we find out through the eyes of Mozazu that Yumi and Solomon were on the street walking.
Right.
And I think it was a drunk driver.
Yes, a drunk driver swerves, loses control, and Yumi is able to push Solomon out of the way before she gets hit and passes.
Which is the ultimate sacrifice. I mean, Yumi's character seems so beautiful. It's a shame that it was such a short character arc, but even in that short time of introduction, we see the misery that she goes through, and then we see what she was able to develop into, and to the end where she has not only developed life, but imprinted her legacy within the world through this means.
Right.
Yeah. I know. This was a sad way to start off. In my mind, this was the safest and most beautiful version of relationship.
For sure. And for those of you who are gonna stick with us on this journey, this particular episode, it's gonna continue to get sad. But there are some high points.
Mozazu does find a new girlfriend. We don't know much about her.
Yes, we don't know much about her yet. We just know that they work well together and that this person has a good relationship with the rest of their family, especially with Sonja. So we know that there is good, but she's just been introduced.
Right, and her name's Atsuko.
Yes.
Okay. And then so continue on with Mozazu's...
relationships.
Yeah. Mozazu and Haruki are able to reunite.
Yes, and now that they're older, Haruki has become a policeman.
Right. And so they reunite in front of Totoyama's shop, and they are able to kind of rekindle this relationship, it seems like.
Yeah.
But there's a caveat, because we find out something about Haruki in this moment.
That Haruki has had love for Mozasu.
And I would even say more lust and love. Like, it was definitely a longing for Mozasu more than just I love you like a human. Like, it's like, I want you.
True, but I think he first fell in love with how brave Mozasu is before he fell in love with his looks.
Fair. So then let's now follow Haruki, because Haruki has a whole thing with him. So Haruki is now a police officer. We find out throughout the chapters that he is going to form even a further relationship with Mozasu, more as a friend. He becomes,
like to continue being best friends.
Right, and he becomes the uncle of Solomon, who he is able to take care of. It seems very beautiful at this point of that relationship between Haruki and Mozasu.
Yeah.
Also, though, Haruki decides to get married to Totoyama's foreman.
Yes, Ayame.
Right, and this was more based on the will of Totoyama than I think what Haruki wanted.
Right, but also I think Haruki understood the need to get married. Not only is he hiding his sexuality, he also needs somebody who's going to accept his brother, because he's going to not only take care of his mom when she grows older, but also his brother, who doesn't have the ability to make decisions for himself.
Right. And so that's exactly the role that Ayami starts taking on.
Yeah.
So she comes in the house, she forms a great relationship with Daisuke.
Yes, and considers him her son, because she and Haruki are not able to have children.
Right. And then this is also where we learn the passing of Totoyama, which is like, once again, just characters just bye-bye.
Well, I mean, she's become elderly, so I think
more of a natural death.
Right, it's a natural death. It wasn't tragic.
It wasn't a car.
No.
So at the time of Totoyama's death, Ayami becomes this structure that grounds Daisuke, and so it really forms that relationship and that familial bond between Haruki, Ayami, and Daisuke.
Yes.
We then get the story of Ayami traveling around.
Well, so let's back up for a little bit. We know that Haruki is hiding his sexuality. We know that Ayame is a marriage of convenience. So, content warning for those who are squeamish around sexy time. Skip ahead a minute. But anyway, Ayame stumbles across this park because she hears something. She hears things happening and she wanted to see what was going on.
Right.
And what she saw were people being intimate.
Right. And so this park seemingly is a place where people go often.
Right, like it's a designated park for this activity.
Right. And so at the time she sees them, she turns away, she goes back, and then a woman approaches her.
Right.
And it kind of gives her like lustful eyes and speech and kind of lures her.
Right.
But then Ayumi walks away.
Right.
She consistently thinks back onto this girl and that park, and then so she gets drawn back in.
Yes.
And then so I think it was like a week or two. It wasn't too long after that first visit.
And then she, at one point, she ends up visiting often. Like she's just there to watch.
Right. And so she goes back, she visits this park, and then she sees this person in a suit that looks just like a suit that she's made for Haruki.
Yes.
And then the closer she looks...
It turns out it is Haruki with a man.
Right. A young boy, even, it sounds like. I know. And so this is where Ayumi finds out that Haruki has been becoming intimate with other men.
But I think for her, the hurt was beyond the fact that he's with a man. It's more that he is unfaithful, plus he hasn't wanted her for a long time.
Right. I don't know. This was shocking. I think as soon as she went to that park and it said that two men were involved, I was like, ooh, is that Haruki? And it wasn't. I was like, oh.
I felt like there was the foreshadowing. Like, this is how she's gonna find out. It's gonna happen soon.
Which happened very quickly.
Yes.
Like, not a lot of time passed.
Right.
The sad thing is, yes, Ayami's in this really terrible relationship that I think otherwise it doesn't seem bad, but sexually she's confused. She doesn't feel like her needs are being met.
Well, from what I interpreted, she's not very attracted to Haruki that way either. So, it's not that her needs are not being met, but she feels like she should be meeting his needs, but she's not. So she feels let down in that way. She feels like, oh, I'm not doing my part as a wife.
Right. And I think what I mean by that is more so that she doesn't understand her own sexuality. So whatever needs that she has, which she doesn't really realize what those may be, those aren't being met. Like,
Gotcha.
She isn't really realizing her sexual potential, I guess.
Totally. For sure.
The hard part, though, is that we learn a little bit more about Haruki, and we find out that this isn't something that's new. I mean, we talked about how he had this longing for Mozazu as they were growing up.
Right.
So he knew that he was gay at one point, and
he's been gay.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So we knew that he was gay. He's known that. He's had the feelings for Mozazu to the point where, and this is, once again, content warning about things that are, a little bit more based around death and stuff, but Haruki wanted to take his own life. Now he feels the need to make sure that he watches over Daisuke, especially without his mom around.
Right.
With Ayami around, he cares for her and doesn't want her to go through that. So that's the reason he doesn't want to go through with it.
Right. He feels anchored by them.
Right. So his hiding of his sexuality is obviously a burden for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's tough to see it, but also this day and age is not super kind to people being sexually open.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So switching gears, we're going to start talking about where I think we are starting to hit the climax of our current read, but maybe even the book.
Right, exactly. So, we've talked about Mozasu and his success. Now, let's switch over to Noah.
Right.
Noah is doing well at Waseda, and he meets Akiko, who we mentioned before is this very beautiful, maybe even hot person on campus. And they somehow just match up with each other. The really smart one and the really rambunctious one equals relationship.
Well, he's fascinated by how she can defy authority.
Right.
With the way that she talks in class and she approaches the professor. So he sees this person that I think Noah knows that he isn't. Right.
True. And they have this very fiery relationship.
Right.
However, Akiko starts to really push herself into Noah's life.
Right.
Into the fact that when Noah's about to meet Hansu for the regular get-togethers, Akiko wants to meet him. Noah says no, but once they're at the dinner...
Right. Wait. So before even mentioning that, that's not the first time that Akiko talks about his family. So Akiko has put herself into Noah's life multiple times, constantly asking to meet his family. So we're also told that Akiko studies, I think, sociology and somewhat of something based around human behavior.
Right, exactly.
So this is her being
like a little project.
Right, and educationally curious rather than seeing Noah as a human, which is kind of what Noah constantly repeats in this book, is wanting to be seen as a human.
Right, just being seen for himself.
Right, and so Noah and Hansu have this dinner.
Right, and then Akiko just shows up out of nowhere, and yes, she sees that the dinner's going well, but she's only seeing it through her own eyes between her and Hansu, because Hansu is very charmed by her.
Right.
But after the dinner, Noah is upset. He expresses that he didn't appreciate that. And Akiko, like, tries to switch the conversation over and is like, well, you make it sound like these people are bad. You do know that Hansu is your dad. You look alike.
Okay, hold on.
What?
You're, like, not putting enough emphasis into some of these moments. Okay, one is Hansu and Noah are meeting up and they're talking.
Right.
And they are talking about just random things. Like, Hansu never went to college.
Mm-hmm.
Noah is going.
Student.
So Hansu is, like, constantly asking Noah, just trying to learn from him. That
Right.
there's no other context. And then all of a sudden, Akiko shows up. Like, nobody knew this was going to happen.
Right.
And then they're going through this conversation. Eventually, Hansu leaves. Mm-hmm. And so Akiko has time with Noah. Mm-hmm. And then so Noah pretty much is telling Akiko that they can't be in a relationship and that he no longer wants to see her. And this is where Akiko gets mad and she just, like, bursts out and it's like, Hansu's your dad. Hansu's a Yakuza. Like, she was so angry about it and
Right.
Noah knows none of this.
Right, and she's only just putting things together. It's not like she knows. And
Right.
also, the reason why he wanted to break up was not just because she showed up, but because the way that she was talking about Noah, like, maybe you should meet my family and show them what a good Korean looks like.
Right.
Which again goes back to how Noah wants to be seen for himself, to be seen as a human, to be seen as a person.
Right.
But in actuality, Akiko just sees him as a project and
Right.
sees him as Korean first and foremost.
Right. Although, I think Akiko has a lot of brilliance and she has a great sense in taste because she does talk about how Koreans are so handsome.
Wow.
So, I don't think she's all bad.
Wow. I don't think she has any tact, but okay.
I think she's very intelligent and has
Wow.
great taste in men.
Wow.
Anyways, so, yeah, like, this is the point where I think Noah's life is kind of turned around because,
Yeah.
yes, Akiko has no actual evidence for
The
any of
things
this
that
being
she's-
true,
Yeah.
but Noah fully believes it. Like, he kind of is starting to put two and two together and be like,
Yeah.
oh, maybe this is true.
Right.
Like, how, because she mentions, like, how is he affording your place in Tokyo? How is he affording your college? Like, what could he be possibly doing?
If he's just a contractor, why is he able to make all this money?
Right, because Akiko comes from a wealthy family and she's like, my dad can't even do that. Like,
Right.
what on earth is he doing?
Right.
And so I think Noah comes to the realization that Akiko's probably right.
Yeah.
So, this then leads Noah to try to figure out the answers to these questions that he now has.
By confronting his mom, Sunja.
Right. So he goes directly to the house and he talks to Sunja.
And by reading it, it sounds more like accusing.
Right. But also trying to just get answers of, are any of these true? It must be so confusing for him because he doesn't even have a day to think. He went straight from that dinner.
Right, to his mom. And
Right.
pulling her aside in the middle of nowhere.
Right. And so Sunja pretty much confirms this. Like, she doesn't lie. She pretty much tells him the story of everything that's happened.
Right, and she's also not sugarcoating anything.
Right.
She's saying it like it is. She's also giving him context about how she was so young and Hansu pretty much took away her innocence.
Right.
But all Noah heard was, Hansu is my father.
Not only that, but Hansu, the Yakuza, is his father.
Right, and he takes that to heart and he's like, my blood is dirty.
Right, because for Noah, he's been trying to find this identity. And it's like, am I Korean? How do I become Japanese? And this is his biggest concern. And now he goes into this point of, I have the blood of a gangster, which they have been seen as some of the worst people. And so I think he carries on this burden of his father of being this really awful person.
Right. And I remember making the prediction that Noah is too good of a person and he's also internalizing so many things, like you said, trying to figure out his identity and trying to fit in the society where he's been raised in, and he's going to explode. And this is his explosion.
Right. And sadly, we also are starting to realize that Joseph may have been correct. I mean, the fact that Hansu should not have been in their lives, the fact that maybe not have taken that money, like all that stuff that Joseph had said, I don't know if correct's the right word, but it maybe could have evaded some of the stuff that's going to happen.
I'm gonna take a different stance. I think if they were just honest about why Hansu was there, maybe things could have been, like the context could have been built in.
Maybe, but I mean, either way, I don't think Noah took the fact that Hansu is a Yakuza went over extremely well. I think even at any point, if Noah hears that,
right,
he feels those same feelings.
I see. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I just don't want Joseph to be right.
Right. Which he's not even in these chapters. I don't know where he is.
All we know is that he's getting worse. He's still ill, and they're still taking care of him.
Right.
And I'm like, wow, this guy is going to live forever.
Right. So, upon the realization of his bloodline, Noah is extremely upset. He doesn't want Hansu to pay for Waseda, so he's going to drop out. And also, he wants to leave and doesn't want the family to ever follow him.
Right. And doesn't want anyone to know where he is.
Right.
Like, totally cutting everyone off.
Right. And this is where we find that relationship between Hansu and Sunja. So because Noah is now gone, we see the first time in this book that Sunja has to go ask for help.
Yes, from all people, Hansu.
Right. And so if we think about all the scenarios that she's been in, from being destitute, having no food, having no future, to now, her child is the one thing that brings her to her knees to go find Hansu, and not even just find him, but have to confront his wife, have to beg for some kind of assistance.
Right. Or any assurance that assistance will come.
Right. And sadly, she gets none for a really long time.
As in years. Like, I cannot believe that Hansu left her on red for 6 years.
6 years.
Like, oh my gosh. So much can happen in 6 years.
Yeah, and so Hansu is trying. Like, I think the book explains how he was trying to find Noah but couldn't find him. And so he just didn't want to connect with Sunja because he didn't want to give her hope.
Right, because he had no news.
Exactly. So not the best route, but at least he was trying. He knew that this was going on.
Fair, but when he shows up at the funeral of Yumi, he still has nothing.
Right.
So he could have done that a long time ago, I think.
Fair. So Hansu re-enters Sunja's life a little bit. They are talking a little bit more.
And the reason he re-enters is because his news isn't because of Noah. His news is personal.
Right.
I think it was very narcissistic of him to come to her with this news, because the news is that he has prostate cancer.
Right.
And to come to her with this news, I feel like he expects her to fall to her knees and want to reconnect.
Right. And the way that he does that is by saying that he's dying.
Right.
And has prostate cancer.
But he's not dying.
Well, what he says later when Sunja approaches him by saying, "You're not dying of prostate cancer," which is what he says. He says, "I'm not dying of prostate cancer." Later, what his correction is, "Well, we're all dying."
I wanted to slap him. I do not condone violence. However, I literally eye-rolled and I was driving. And I shouldn't be eye-rolling while driving.
And so Hansu does find Noah. And in this new life of Noah, he's completely different. He no longer has the name Noah. I think he
goes by a Japanese name because he wants to completely erase his Korean heritage. He doesn't want anyone to know.
Right. So his name is now Nobuoban, and he has moved to Nagano. So when we first meet his character, he is at this restaurant.
Yes.
And he's eating different foods and things like that, but the waiter is extremely friendly.
Yes. Nosy.
Nosy, for sure nosy. But the waiter does help him kind of create a new life.
Yeah.
Because he says, hey, there's this person that owns a pachinko parlor.
Irony.
Exactly. And he helps Noah find a job that will not only set him up for his new life,
right,
but also make so much money that he can start not only paying his mom to give her money to survive off of, but also enough to pay back the money to Hansu for Waseda.
Right, wow.
Yeah, and definitely ironic because, I mean, there were many mentions in this book of Noah would never work at a pachinko parlor.
Right, because it's, once again, quote unquote, dirty money.
Right, and it's beneath him. It also was that divergence of Mozasu, who is uneducated, and Noah, who is educated.
Yeah.
But the fact that they kind of come back to the middle of working this same job.
Right.
Yeah. So along the way, Noah's working at this parlor, and he ends up meeting Risa. Risa Iwamura, who works a different position, but he ends up finding her interesting.
Because of her handwriting.
Right.
And he feels as though when he gets any of the memos with her handwriting, he thinks that whoever it is has some kind of lightness and joy or some kind of like grace.
Yeah, like a connection to her.
Yes, exactly.
The story carries on pretty quickly.
Yep. And
Noah and Risa start this wonderful life.
They get married.
They have 4 children. But during this whole process, one, because of work, but also because he doesn't want his kids to feel shame, Noah never admits nor wants to show that he is Korean.
Right. He essentially carries on as if his heritage was Japanese.
Right. So let's re-enter with Sunja and Hansu.
Yes.
So Hansu comes back to Sunja, asks her to come in the car because he has now found Noah. He's gonna take both of them to Nagano.
Yes.
To go find Noah.
Because he knows his routine.
Exactly. Now the thing is, Hansu, he has to be smart. He has to know humans, because he immediately tells Sunja, don't go approach him. Now, once Sunja sees Noah, she can't stop herself.
Right. She bursts out of the car and calls for him.
Right. And so, seemingly, Noah is happy to see her. He has been wanting them to reconnect. He was honestly hoping that Hansu would find him sooner so that they could connect. But at the same time, he still is hiding his Koreanness. He's still hiding so many parts about himself that I think this is where the dissonance starts colliding. And this is where we get that trigger warning. So if you are triggered by content based around like suicide and death, I would say maybe skip the next 30 seconds, maybe a minute, but we are going to go into it just a bit.
Yes.
So Sunja and Noah are talking. Sunja's really asking Noah to come back home. She says, Mozasu has these kids, like you guys could reconnect. And it seems so beautiful in nature. Like it seems like something that could very much be done.
Right. Or at least it's a hope that could be done.
Right.
But Noah keeps putting her off. He says, it's okay, I'll call you. We'll get together. But those vague remarks felt like empty promises to me, which is not that I knew what was coming, but I thought that he was just going to disappear again.
Right. And Sunja also realizes that she never gave him her number to call.
Right.
So no one never had intent to go through with this.
Right.
And we find that out pretty quickly because almost as soon as she left the pachinko parlor, we find out that Noah has shot himself. Again, a really quick death for a pretty massive character in this book.
Right. Quick, sudden, big.
Right. Which, I guess for me, it kind of felt like what that news might feel like in person. Is
For sure.
It was so quick, it was so brief, there was no lingering, there was no real true emotions tied with it.
There was no closure.
Right, and it's the end of a chapter but not the end of the book.
Right.
And it just felt like if you hear that news, that's what you hear, is that news. There's no you should feel this way, this is what happened. Is you hear what that news is, and it felt very real in the way that it all occurred.
Right. It felt like walking and then suddenly falling off a cliff.
Right. And that's how we end our read.
Yep.
Is chapter 8 that news that we
for
just
real.
got.
Seriously. When I read that part, like, big F-bomb. That's what came out of me, and I was like, I cannot. I now need a cigarette and a drink, and I don't smoke, so.
And now I'm going to continue the content warning, because I want to talk about some of the stuff that kind of was mentioned and brief that I think has meaning to the story.
Yeah.
But weren't massive talking points within this.
Yeah.
But there was a case that Haruki got once he moved to
Yokohama.
Yeah.
Hana.
And the original
Yokohama. Yes.
Yokohama. The original detective wasn't there, so he got this case about a 12-year-old Korean boy who commits suicide because of the bullying that he got.
Right.
For Haruki, this was very shocking. It seemed very out of place.
Right.
It really distraught him quite a bit, and this is the thing that brought back his own trauma and kind of led him to think about his own suicide.
Like suicidal thoughts.
Right. He then goes to talk to Mozazu, who is actually Mozazu comes to him and is like, why are you wasting all your money?
Right.
But he talks to Mozazu about this, and Mozazu's like, yeah, I went through the same thing. This seems like something that, a lot of Koreans went through.
Right.
For Haruki, obviously, it's a little bit different. But the other thing that Mozazu mentions is that it was maybe the stress of trying to become a good Korean. And he mentions this about Noah, because he says Noah, quote unquote, got tired of being a good Korean and quit. I was never a good Korean. I think that was the transparency of the two characters of Noah and Mozazu, which we saw completely different paths for.
Right.
I mean, it was really sad. And the link between this 12-year-old boy and Noah is so direct at this point.
Exactly.
Wild. Staying on a depressing note,
For real.
we also, I think, and this is a completely different content warning, which I think we forgot to talk about in the beginning, but there is a case of pretty direct, it's not domestic violence, but it's definitely violence. And it was very vivid. So, if this is something that triggers you, if this is something that, it's just not going to bring you joy to listen to, I would say skip over probably the next minute and a half or so.
Yeah.
But I'm going to talk about it now.
Yes.
Hansu. So when Hansu comes back to the funeral, he gets a notification from his driver that the girl in his car really needs him.
It's an emergency, quote unquote.
Right. And the girl in the car is like his 18-year-old mistress, Noriko. Noriko is like, oh, I just was lonely. I wanted you to take me shopping. Stuff that she does with her other, like, suitors and things like that. But Hansu's pissed. Like, he's like, I'm at this funeral. I'm trying to show respect.
Right.
I just don't think he was having any of it. And then he pretty much just beats her.
Yeah.
Like, really badly. And I think they even say, like, to the point where she can no longer work in this field and has to be sent off. So, really badly.
Yeah.
I think the scene was so important. Like, obviously, it's terrible.
Yes.
But I think it needed to have this because Hansu, for me, I know he's a bad person, but I couldn't put direct images or direct actions to that negativeness. Like, it was always like, yeah, he's Yakuza. Yeah, he's kind of like trying to manipulate Sunja, but it was all stuff that was more, it wasn't as tangible. But once this happened, it's like, this is the darkness that we knew had to be underlying come very much to life.
For real. It's very ugly, very dark.
Right.
I always knew he was a devil.
Well, I think we could all have insinuated that, but once again, he still has love for Sunja. He still, when he was looking for
Lust.
Noah,
he has lust for Sunja. There was one section where he's talking about he remembers her being innocent and then getting hard because she's innocent, and I'm like, gross.
Right. I think for him, this is love. Like, this is the closest to love. Because when you compare Sunja to his relationship with his wife, he absolutely doesn't care about his wife. Like, like, he's never home, like, nothing. So I think this is probably the closest that Hansu has to love.
I guess, if a monster can love.
Right. So I think the way that he treats her is in a very loving way. He's always trying to provide. He's trying to do things. Like I said, when he was providing for her when she was poor and, like, trying to create the kimchi business and stuff, he still stayed in the background instead of trying to take on that applause, that reverence. He was just like, I want you to be healthy. I want my kid to be safe. So in that way, in my mind, I thought, okay, he's not all bad. He's still a human. Even the way that he talked to Noah, it seemed very much fatherly. Like, he wanted to get to know his son better. So there were characteristics about him that seemed not only human, but good in a way. But knowing that he's Yakuza, knowing, like, these other components, that there's no way that he could be a good person. And then for this scene to come out, it was, like, very actualized.
Very vivid.
Yeah. So these are points, I think, that are going to start leading us into further discussion. The other point is that Hansu also meets Haruki. This is when Haruki comes to the house to play with Solomon.
Right.
And Hansu actually gives Haruki a business card if he's ever interested in transferring to a job in Tokyo's police precinct. This is where I want to lead into predictions. Okay. Because I've gone all my... Like, I feel like I kind of got some predictions right, but I don't know what's happening anymore. Like, new characters are coming in, and then they leave. And then new character enters, they leave. It's like...
And then a character that we loved and followed all of a sudden also leaves, but not in the way we think leaving means.
Right. Like, we don't even know what happened with Goro.
Right.
What Chung-ho is maybe in Korea, maybe not.
Well, he's in North Korea, so we know it's not great for him.
Right. So, and then Yosef is dying.
But not really dying.
And then his wife
is just taking care of Yosef.
Yeah, we have no... Anyway, so there's so much going on.
And so little information at this point.
Right. So what are your predictions as we get to the end of this book?
I think things are going to end badly between Hansu and Sunja. Like, I don't know if there is any foreshadowing with that one scene that we talked about, but I think it's not going to go well between the two of them. I think... Or maybe it's more, I hope that things go well for Mozasu and Solomon, but I think it's just the two of them who get a bright ending. I think things are going to go bad for Haruki and Ayame, but specifically Haruki. Who knows what's going to happen to Risa at this point? She might just disappear with the rest of the other characters that we no longer see.
Right.
And I'm also curious to see what happens with Mozasu and his new girlfriend Atsuko.
Right. Yeah, I am so lost. I have no idea what's happening.
Exactly.
I'm hoping that Sunja has a happy ending, because she seems to be the mainstay of the
entire
whole book.
Story, yeah.
Because we started off with Huni, who's her father.
Yes.
And then we saw her grow up in the boarding house.
Yeah.
And we moved on to Tokyo with her and Isa. So she has been this main character throughout the whole story. Come on. Something has to happen good to her. This is such a sad book otherwise. I'm hoping that she gets vengeance on Hansu.
Oof, that's a big hope. I don't know if that hope is going to come true in this book.
Right, because I'm assuming that she has blame for him. I mean, technically... He did tell her not to go to Noah, but I don't know, like, it just doesn't seem right.
Right, not at all.
Right. I'm also hoping that Mozazu and Solomon have a great ending.
Yes.
I don't know, I guess I'm very optimistic in the nature of hoping that Haruki is also in that scene, because it's so sweet how he deals with Solomon.
I know.
But knowing the darkness and the depth of his own insecurities and what he's grown up with, I agree. I don't see a great ending for him and his family, including Daisuke.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I'm honestly so confused by this point.
I feel like we should just be ready for lots of tears.
Yes.
And not of joy.
Yes. So, our next read is going to be the end of this book.
Yes, we're closing out with, for those who are reading the hardcover, pages 392 to 485. But for everyone, this is book 3, Pachinko. We're reading chapters 9 through the very end to 21.
Right. So for anyone that's also kind of really saddened by this book
and needs a drink.
Yeah, if you just need someone to talk to and message, how can people reach out to us?
Please reach out to us through email at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com. You can also write to us through DMs or comment on Instagram at asianbookclubpod.
Right, and we also have our website at asianbookclubpod.com, which also has our bookshop where you can find this book if you still want it, and other books that we have read, will read, and suggest. But we appreciate you going through this with us. It's a heavy read, but it's also been a beautiful story.
Yes.
So I wish upon all of you, be happy, be healthy, and go read a book.
Ingat.
Bye.
Bye.